Okay, today is Tuesday, October 25th, 2011. We're beginning learning Module 4, and in fact, this is the last class session before we have the midterm examination. And your midterm examination includes, as I just said a moment ago, learning Modules 1 through 4. Now, learning Module 4 is about some specific area of concern within forensic interviewing of children. And if there's one thing that gives forensic interviewers the most anxiety, if there's one thing that courts are most vigilant about, if there's one thing that's of utmost concern to investigators, it's the impact of our questions on kids' recollections. Or to put it differently, suggestibility. Suggestibility. One reason why there are a number of protocols around the country to help people in child protection and in law enforcement interview kids better is because there is significant concern about suggestibility. All of these interview protocols, including the one we'll talk about later and the others that we'll discuss in an overview, all of these forensic interview protocols are designed to address the potential impact of suggestibility. And that's the thing that interviewers worry the most about. They don't want to be suggestive. They don't want to be leading. When they look at their work, when they review their work, when they have peer review, they're always concerned about whether they were too leading or too suggestive. Sometimes I've given you examples in class about different issues, different questions. I suggested maybe we can ask the child about that subject in this way. And I've even caught myself and said, wait a minute, that would be a little too suggestive and a little too leading. I have to think about that. I have to change the question up. It's always a concern. And we're going to take a real close look at how to address these concerns in a way that reduces anxiety, in a way that gives us some simpler strategies for addressing these challenges. We need to start out by understanding that you're not going to eliminate suggestibility completely. You can't interview another human, another person, without being somewhat suggestive, without giving another person information or cues, or somehow directing them about the area that you're interested in. Human conversation doesn't work any other way. It requires that the speaker orient the subject. Now, there is a fine balance between orienting the subject, between cueing that person, between letting that person know what you're interested in, and moving the dialogue in the appropriate direction and influencing a person's memory. There's a fine line between cueing them and influencing them. We want to be able to cue them. We want to be able to direct them without influencing them. So we'll talk about all those things. Plus. So I'm going to do the PowerPoints that are among your readings here, and the one question that we need to address right off the bat is whether we can get a kid to say or believe something that wasn't true. Can that happen because of the kinds of questions we ask and the way in which we ask them? What do you think? Yeah, that can happen, and many of you may have watched the video that I included in Learning Module 4. We're going to revisit that this afternoon. The sad fact of the matter is, for some kids, the way we ask questions and the kinds of questions we ask can lead them to say and believe something that is not true. Before we go there, I want to put a little historical context on this issue. And the photograph I have there is of a home in Massachusetts that belonged to a woman named Rebecca Nurse. And from your readings, week 1, you realize that suggestibility and the integrity of children's recollections has been an issue for centuries. That people throughout the ages have been skeptical of kids' memories. On the one hand, they see kids as honest and direct. On the other hand, they see them as easily influenced. So this is not a modern phenomenon, this question of suggestibility in forensic interviewing. It's been a concern throughout the years. And the historical context, the way in which people thought about the credibility or believability of children throughout the ages helps inform or shape how we think about kids today. Whether you know it or not, whether you feel it or not, what happened in the late 17th century in Massachusetts continues to this day to influence people's perceptions of children's reliability, especially in judicial proceedings. Because in 1690 or so, the woman who lived in that home, as well as 18 other people, were arrested and tried for sorcery. They were convicted and hanged until they died. What was important for our purposes was that the trials relied almost substantially, almost exclusively rather, on the testimony of children. The accusers, the witnesses in the Salem witch trials of 1692 were children. And what made this sad chapter in our American history all the more tragic was that there was due process here. This wasn't a couple of crazy town fathers of the time rounding up people, or a posse in the Old West who was misinformed or full of testosterone and Jack Daniels rounding up some people they believed might have killed some town folk. This was measured and clear-headed. There were judges who came from Boston. There were attorneys who represented the accused. There were attorneys in the courtroom. There was rules of evidence. There was due process. These trials went on for days. Now, so how did all these people get hanged, and how could people believe this? Well, this was a very different time in American history. This was in the colonial period. This is where, people in Europe, before they came to the Americas, believed in sorcery. They believed in a lot of things that were superstitious. And a lot of the behaviors of people in that community may have been peculiar. I mean, there may have been facts and behavior and evidence upon which to think that something was going on. And if you believed in sorcery and you had people who may have been ill because they ate poisoned rye or because they were mentally ill and acting weird, it wasn't a great leap intellectually to believe that they may be demonically possessed, because they truly believed this. So did the judges who came from Boston. The whole group believed it. In fact, they believed it so much, while I said there was a book of evidence, and they relied on that book of evidence, within the books of evidence, there were provisions about the admission of spectral evidence. Spectral evidence is evidence that involves ghosts or apparitions. While there was the rule of law was bizarre. The rule of law included evidence about ghosts and apparitions. And there was very rigorous rules about admitting evidence that a witness saw a ghost who communicated with them. So while it had this veneer of due process, while it had this veneer, this outward appearance of the rule of law, it was a rule of law that was quite different than what we know and respect now. It was a rule of law that was consistent with the belief systems of those times. And unfortunately, 19 people were hanged. Contrary to popular belief, no one was ever burned at the stake in the United States. In France and in Italy and Spain, they would haul off mostly women. There are many, many articles and books that address the misogyny of the Salem witch trials and the witch trials of Europe, France, England, Italy, and Spain as misogynistic acts, as acts of violence against women, because nearly everyone who was burned or hanged were women. But back to the main point here. You had something that resulted in tragic consequences, and here's the rub, where everyone who was sentenced in a court of law was 100% innocent. It's very rare that we can say that in this world of ours. You know, the jail's full of people who are innocent. They didn't do it. If you ever go to the county jail in any county in this state, or the state prison, or anywhere else, no one says inmate to inmate, or person who's friendly with the inmate to inmate, what did you do? They say, what they say you do. What did they say you did? Because nobody did it. They just say I did it. Well, although everyone in our jails, not everyone, it's obviously, I say it jokingly, but I bet you if you interview 1 through 157 at the Passaic County Jail, probably 154 say they're innocent. They're probably not innocent, right? But we know 100% of the people hanged in Salem were innocent. Innocent beyond belief. Totally innocent. Unequivocally innocent. Innocent. There's no such thing as witches or sorcery. And they were convicted because children marched into court. They raised their right hand and they swore to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And they told what they told, and people died. We're approaching Halloween. Try finding a parking spot in Salem, Massachusetts around Halloween. Because it has become symbolic of a few things. One, it's become a kind of fun, hip, funky place to be alternative, I guess, or to be rebellious. But it also was such a tragic aspect of the American experience that we think about it today. And the term witch trial or witch hunt is an enduring metaphor for an institutional investigation, an investigation by the authorities that's gone out of whack, that's out of control, that's not based in fact. If you Google witch hunt, okay, if you Google witch trial or witch hunt, if you go on the search engine Google and look up those terms, and you know, in Google, there's a thing that says other search, something on the left-hand side. It says something like, no, that's in the middle. On the left-hand side, it says something like other search terms or something. You click on that and it'll say past 24 hours, past week, past year, or all time. Very often I say past year, because I don't want results from 2004 or whatever. If you put past week and Google witch hunt, you'll get thousands of hits. It's such a compelling and enduring metaphor. So when we think about kids, a little piece of our brain, whether you know it or not, when judges think about kids and juries think about kids and supervisors think about kids and how credible they are, part of the mosaic of the American experience includes what happened in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. Now, why is this not? There we go. So you have Rebecca Nurse, and you have Sigmund Freud. Now, Sigmund Freud was considered the father of modern psychiatry. his popularity and the respect for his teachings ebbs and flows over the years. Nevertheless, he is a towering figure in mental health, right? Sigmund Freud. Very few of us can name more than one or two psychiatrists other than Sigmund Freud. Very few of us can name some other psychiatrist who's famous. But most of us know or heard of Sigmund Freud. I mean, he's the rock star of rock stars when it comes to psychiatry. And one of the things that Sigmund Freud did was he had this concern about his patients who were coming to see him, because he had a private practice. He wasn't simply a writer and a thinker and he had to start somewhere. And he was in Vienna, and he saw patients, and he had women patients, and a lot of them had life's issues as adults. They were neurotic, and they had different phobias and fears, and he was trying to address those issues. And after a while, seeing the same patterns with women, adult women, in his practice, he began to think about it, and he concluded that a lot of their adult neuroses were linked to childhood sexual molestation and incest, because he was hearing women say that. So he began to see patterns. Now, when he began to share this observation with his colleagues, and he began to write it down and publish papers and go to Paris and London and communicate with his colleagues in psychiatry about these issues, they looked at him like he had three heads. Fathers molesting their daughters, childhood sexual abuse. What are you talking about? So anyway, he wasn't well received in academic circles in psychiatry with his notion that women's adult neuroses are related to child sexual molestation. So he did something that really set women and children back for generations, and it endures today, and it's sad, but it's a fact. And Freud went back and he retooled his hypotheses, and he said that, you know what, a lot of the women who come to see me, and a lot of the women perhaps in your practices, fellow psychiatrists, have problems functioning as adults with their lovers, with their children. They have problems functioning as adults because they have a variety of neuroses, because they fantasized about being sexually abused as children by their fathers. Not much different than his original hypotheses, but its impact was dramatically different. I mean, this adds to the public perception that women and children make false allegations of sexual abuse and rape and molestation, and that childhood incest is not real. Now, there are lots of people between Freud and today, and between the Salem witch trials and today, that cast doubt and help shape the public perception about the credibility of sexual abuse allegations. But Freud certainly didn't help. You Google Sigmund Freud, and you see one of the enduring aspects of his research was this theory about fantasized incest. And here we are in 2011.
Was this the same notion of the Oedipus complex?
It's related to that, yeah.
Because I know that in the last class there was where, before it being called the Oedipus complex, he named it something else, but because his colleagues did not agree to it, he had to change it, because he said that how women, the younger the girls, tend to fantasize as their fathers being their husbands. And everyone had an issue with that.
It's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and you have cases like the Duke rape case, and you have cases like the maid at the prestigious hotel in New York, and the president of the IMF from a couple of months back. You know, and I I get disheartened when I see those kinds of cases, because all it does is validate the misperception that the average person has, that women and children will make false allegations of sexual abuse to advance some hidden agenda, to blackmail, to extort, to get back at a lover, to explain an otherwise consensual relationship, to manipulate. You know, and if you lined up 1 billion rape victims, you wouldn't find very many at all who made an accusation that was false to do any or all of those things. But then you have these cases, you know, and some people want to say, aha, see? Now this IMF guy, I mean, the Duke rape case was one thing. And the woman in that case had mental health problems. There was falsified evidence. It was just a total mess in North Carolina. And, you know, I have my own ideas about that case, too. You know, I don't know whether this woman was raped. I don't know the facts. I haven't read the trial transcripts. Not far from it. But we all know that was, not we all know, but, you know, many observers, legal observers, have concluded that case was a mess. It was wrongly prosecuted. It was fraudulently prosecuted. There were tremendous violations of ethics and the rule of law that are embarrassing to the profession, embarrassing to the state of North Carolina. You know, and it's with some pause that I watched the Duke lacrosse players as if somebody anointed them saints, and you know, after the case was dropped and the prosecutor was prosecuted and was disbarred, you know, as though they are pristine and they didn't do anything wrong. Well, they may or not have raped her. I don't know. But let's not forget that was a off-campus fraternity party where they had naked women in a bathroom. That's the uncontroverted facts. So, this wasn't like some crazy woman walked into a church picnic and falsely accused people. Now, the IMF guy, he's got to make peace with his maker someday, that guy. You know, here you had the woman who was sexually assaulted to, unfortunately, sometimes rape victims and sexual assault victims view what happened to them as a way to get a better life. And that's a difficulty in prosecuting celebrities, because that argument can be made every time. And I can guarantee you there's very few people in the world who were assaulted or molested by a celebrity who don't think about the fact that they can get a civil reward. And that's exactly what destroys prosecutions. Now, this woman had a lot of baggage. But I don't for a minute think that person was innocent. Now, how much he forced her, what the quality of force was, I don't know. But what happens is after that case dies, it's he didn't do it. It becomes a he didn't do it. Wait a minute. We know that the guy, he doesn't even know this woman. The guy wakes up one morning, he shaves and showers, puts his bags together, and what? The cleaning lady wants to fillet him? mean, give me a break. There has to be some kind of assertive conduct. It just doesn't work that way to go, hey, how you doing? I'm some scraggly old dude from France. And the notion that she has been laying in wait that's ridiculous too. I mean, the fact of the matter is, she alleges that he bullied her into sexual acts. That seems to me to be the more persuasive explanation than she walked in the room and he walked out of the bathroom ready to leave, and she was so taken by his charisma that she decided to fillet him. I mean, come on. But when the dust settles, we see the Duke young men as being wrongly accused, and the woman was a nut and falsely accused them, and they never did anything, and there's no evidence to say they did. And this guy, the dust settles, and the public believes, when they stop thinking about it, they look at the new headlines, that nothing happened. Prosecutors throughout history have had, we've had a hand in forming public perception. Because for many, many years, prosecutors didn't charge these cases. And when I say these, I'm narrowing it down just a bit. Cases involving kids and incest and intrafamilial abuse. Now, if there was a case where there was blood or vaginal tearing or injury or, something where there was a significant attack that was acute, meaning it just happened, there was a prompt complaint, throughout the years, prosecutors would go after those cases. But any other kind of case, the typical incest case, the ones that form the bread and butter of our practice now, the chronic abuse cases, the seduction, the grooming, the fondles, and the progressive molests, the delayed disclosures, those cases were not prosecuted. At best, when there was a child protection, it was a family issue. And that kind of law enforcement response helps shape how people think about these things, about kids, about their credibility, about how these cases ought to be treated. Fortunately, that's the historical context. Things are changing. As I said earlier, jurors perceive kids as trustworthy, honest, and innocent, but they also view them as having poor cognitive ability and not being resistive to suggestion. So you have this backdrop where people are skeptical of kids, what they have to say, and whether they can be misled. And there are generations and generations of historical events and people who help shape the public perception. But that's not research. Eventually, there's some academic research where real smart people took cold, hard looks in laboratories at just how malleable kids' memories are, just how much you can move around and distort kids' memories by asking questions or doing investigations. Before 1979, there wasn't very much research at all, but from 79 to 92, there was about 100 studies or more. Most of this research was pro-child. And by pro-child, some would say that's the way they started out, but by pro-child we mean, in the end, the research demonstrated that the kids did well and they were less vulnerable to suggestion than we thought, than people's perceptions. They were not easily misled. One of the studies was called the Clown Study, and you don't need to remember the details of these studies for your midterm or any other exam. But what I just want to do is introduce you to the concept of laboratory research informing us or telling us or helping us understand the impact of forensic questioning on kids. Well, one of the early studies on kids' suggestibility was the clown study. And there you had a pair of kids. They were preschoolers to maybe second graders. They went into a trailer where there was a man dressed as a clown. One of the kids watched. That would be the passive child. They weren't doing anything. And the other one interacted with the clown. And he did something with them, patted him on the head, let them touch his tie, whatever. Kids were asked leading questions such as, he took your clothes off, didn't he? Not one of the children who interacted with the clown made a false report. One of the bystander kids said that they were spanked. So that's a good outcome, right? Most of these studies, by the way, were done by Gail Goodman, who was a researcher, and her colleagues. Gail Goodman and her colleagues in 1991 studied 72 non-abused 5 to 7-year-old girls. Now what's happening here is the first study involved a clown, right? And one kid interacted, and the other kid watched. And then they asked leading questions. He took your clothes off, didn't he? That's a misleading question. You know, he was wearing a big hat with a bell on it, wasn't he? Misleading and leading questions. But the one problem with laboratory research in this area is you can't abuse a kid. You can never replicate exactly what happens to a real abused kid, because you can't abuse a kid, and you certainly can't have a father or loved one abuse a kid. So the research in this area is always going to be lacking in a way. And one of the ways that academics evaluate whether research is helpful or not is to look at its ecological validity. Now, ecological validity means, well, if you put together this experiment, how close is that, the experiment, to what really happens? How close is that to what really happens? And the first experiment, well, kids, we're talking about kids who are abused by someone they love, and then they're questioned afterwards. Sexually abused by someone they love, and then they're questioned afterwards. Well, a kid going in a trailer and messing with a clown's tie and then leaving, that's not that similar to what they experience. It's certainly not traumatic. It seems almost fun and frivolous, right? So the way they remember, the way they process, the environment in which the acts occur, and then the follow-up questions and the outcome are quite different than if a kid is molested by their father in a traumatic way, as they're all traumatic, but however traumatic it is, it will impact the outcome. So, that's not, it certainly addresses kids' memories a little bit, and certainly addresses whether, if they just experience something, we ask them leading questions, what happens. So that's kind of in there, but it doesn't have a lot of ecological validity. Very little. Again, ecological validity is how similar is the experiment to what you're studying. So that's why you have them saying, you know what, let's do a different study, a medical exam study. Now again, is this a total analog? Is it completely the same as a kid who's being abused by someone they love? No. But it has more ecological validity, arguably, than the clown study. Because the medical exam study is it's assumed that it's an anxious environment. Kids are going to see the doctor. It's a little bit more formal. It's a little bit more anxious than a clown in a trailer and a fun, big shoes and big red nose. So they studied 72 children, all females. Half of them had a genital exam. The other half had a scoliosis exam, which is an examination of the spine and their posture. Afterwards, they were asked open-ended questions. None of them made a false report. Only 22% mentioned a genital touch. When they were asked direct questions about genital touch, 14 to 21% failed to reveal genital touching. you did get a 6% false report from the scoliosis exam report. Among the girls who simply had their back checked, 6% said that they touched their vagina. But what was more interesting, I don't want to say more interesting, they're both interesting, was the fact that among the group who had their genitals touched and examined, even when asked direct questions, 14 to 21% failed to mention that their genitals were ever touched. And in the beginning, before the direct questions, only 22% of the children who had their genitals touched offered that. So, what we worry about in forensic interviews of children are false positives. But there's also a concern about false negatives. And I am going to tell you unequivocally, and it doesn't mean that false positives aren't a concern, that false negatives predominate in investigative interviews of children. What do these things mean? False positive means when the system, when the victim says, for example, that they were sexually touched when it never happened. So you can have a false positive from the victim, or the investigation that charges someone and accuses someone, that would be considered a false positive as well. When someone's charged with touching a child sexually, and it never happened. So thus it will be false and positive. The positive meaning the system or the child reports that there was a sexual molestation here. There's a positive result. Was this kid molested? Yes, check, molested. Falsely though, it's a false positive. Never happened. See that number on the bottom, 6% reported being touched on their vaginas on the scoliosis group? That's a 6% false positive rate for that experiment. So if there were 100 kids, 6 of them said they were touched on the vagina out of the 100. That would be 6% false positive. Why? Because the statement about being touched on the vagina was false. Didn't happen. And it was positive because they said something happened, rather than a negative where they said nothing happened. Positive means they said something happened. Negative means they said nothing happened. On the other hand, if you look at the 21% who had their genitals touched and said they didn't, that would be a false negative. That would be a false negative because their genitals were touched, but they said they weren't. So the proposition being examined is whether there was genital touch. The conclusion was erroneous that there was no touch. It was a false negative. If there was no touch, that's a negative. If there was a touch, it's a positive. And in the world of child abuse, when we look at the psychological reactions to incest, and we look at how kids and women experience abuse, and some men, sexual abuse, you will see, and if you don't already know from your practice and from your other classes, that the rate of denial and the rate of minimization is significant in child sexual abuse. And what I mean by that is kids say that nothing ever happened. That's denial, when it did. Or he only touched me once in the butt. Both of those would be false negatives, because they say nothing happened, or only this much happened and all the other things didn't happen. Those would be false negatives. They are commonplace. However, morality, ethics, justice, demands that we focus on false positives, right? What's worse? Some poor guy or gal who never sexually molested a kid being accused, convicted, and jailed for molesting a kid when it never happened? Or a kid who was molested by a caregiver and she says it never happened and therefore it can't be proved? They both suck. They both are tragic outcomes. But on the scale of the more tragic, false positives are to be avoided. I mean, our entire criminal justice system in the United States of America is designed to avoid false positives, to avoid putting people in jail who didn't do something. And that's what a lot of the research is directed at after the State versus Kelly Michaels case. Understanding how to question kids and what to avoid so that you don't wind up with a false positives. Someone who the system concludes is an abuser when in fact they're not. Now I'll give you a little background about Kelly Michaels, and we'll take a look at a video clip. About her. The reason why this case is still talked about, even though it happened way back in the late 80s and the court cases were in the 1990s, is because this woman who was a preschool teacher who came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and moved to New Jersey and took a job at the We Care daycare in Maplewood in Essex County. The daycare was in a part of a church. It might have been a Greek Orthodox church. I forget. When I was in my first year of law school, I went there on behalf of the Victims of Crime Board because the parents were applying for reimbursement for their therapy bills. And I was a law clerk, an intern there. And I remember going there. They had a meeting. I think it was at I don't think it was a Catholic church, but it was part of a church, big place. There's a piano there. Piano figured in the allegations of molestation. But this woman was a 20-something-year-old teacher's aide, and she worked there. And what happened was one of the little boys who were in her class was having his temperature taken rectally by his pediatrician. His mother was in the room, and when the doctor put the thermometer in his butt, he said something like, "Miss Kelly does that to me." There were some questions about that, and what are you talking about? And eventually, the conclusion was that this daycare center lady is Miss Kelly, and maybe she's doing something to them, and an investigation was commenced. And the Division of Youth and Family Services and the Essex County Prosecutor's Office interviewed not only that boy and a couple of other children who had made purportedly spontaneous disclosures. There were 3 core victims that had made spontaneous disclosures. What I mean by that is they didn't come from the prosecutor or the DYFS folks asking questions. And then they said, hey, like any IAIU case, any institutional abuse case in New Jersey, you need to interview all the other kids, or at least some of them. And in regular DYFS intake workers, you got to interview the siblings, right? One kid's molested, the others could have been. That's good practice. I'm not suggesting anything otherwise. And that's what happened here. The good practice was, hey, maybe the other kids were molested. We need to ask. And they interviewed kid after kid after kid after kid. And by the time the dust settles, I think Kelly Michaels was indicted on 119 counts of child sexual abuse involving dozens of children for putting knives in their vaginas and playing the piano naked and rubbing peanut butter on them and having them have sex with one another and letting her watch and having sex on her and all kinds of bizarre allegations. And She was convicted after trial, and she went to state prison for women and spent a number of years there as her case wound up in the appellate courts. The Appellate Division of New Jersey Superior Court ruled that the interviews that were conducted by the prosecutor's office and the Division of Youth and Family Services and clinicians in the Margaret Kelly Michaels case had the potential to create false recollections and to unduly mislead the kids. They reversed her conviction, but the prosecutor's office appealed and went to the New Jersey Supreme Court. There were a couple of other issues in the appellate opinion as well. But the main issue was the suggestive impact of investigative questions and the corrupting impact of those questions on children's memories. Case eventually went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirmed the appellate division, which means they agreed that the case ought to be reversed, and Ms. Michaels is entitled to a new trial. She was not exonerated. She wasn't declared innocent. She simply was entitled to a new trial. The case wound its way through the appellate courts for many years. By the time the case was remanded for a new trial by the Supreme Court, the children were in their teens. There wasn't going to be another trial. Although there was some thought about a new trial, there wasn't going to be another trial, practically speaking, and the case was dismissed. Around the country, Kelly Michaels is studied because it was the first judicial opinion that recognized that the interview process in child sexual abuse cases can corrupt or distort kids' recollections, resulting in an unfair outcome. They started this thing called taint hearings. Open quote, T-A-I-N-T, close quote, taint hearing. Taint, to soil, to dirty, to muck up, to mar. The taint hearing addressed whether the kids' memories were tainted, marred, sullied, dirtied, corrupted, distorted by investigative questioning. Now, the worst possible outcome is they have a memory of something that never happened. That's a false memory. But between a real memory and a false memory, there's all kinds of ways that kids' memories can be distorted. On every facet of their narrative, their telling of what happened. There could be areas and parts that are embellished. Embellished suggests that they're a party to it, that are distorted or different from reality. That aren't necessarily false recollections, but corrupted or distorted or changed memories. Franklin, could you shut the light, please? If you don't mind. I'm going to show you a clip about Michaels.
Number of molestation claims, often against family members like the Souzas, and against daycare operators like McMartin in California and Little Rascals in North Carolina. All these cases are based primarily on the word of children who, after the fact, had repeatedly been asked questions like this.
Do you remember that time when Mr. asked you to stick his penis in your mouth? Okay.
None of the child abuse investigators would agree to be interviewed for this story. Some clearly go too far.
You're pressing your pee-pee against me, Joe. It feels good when you do that. Maybe, is that what they did too?
Steve Cece says the questioning in the Kelly Michaels case was just as leading as this.
They say to the child, we want you to tell us what Kelly did. The kid says, I don't remember. Oh, yes, you do. You remember. No, I don't remember. You do so. We know you remember. At this point, the child's crying. I want to get out of here. You're not going anywhere till you tell us what we know you want, what we know you know.
Basically, we're barraged with questions and coerced, manipulated, begged, made to feel guilty. It just was disgusting.
But where would the kids come up with saying things like, she put the knife in my vagina, or she covered me with peanut butter?
Children have incredible imaginations. And it's not out of realm. Anybody who's a parent who's honest knows what kids are capable of saying.
So there you have Margaret Kelly Michaels and a little clip about her experience. The bottom line is she was convicted, they were reversed, and the landscape in what we do began to change. In fact, that person you saw there, Stephen Cece, filed briefs with the Supreme Court that are called amicus briefs, or friends of the court briefs. He filed legal papers arguing that what happened in that case was wrong, that there's research that shows that kids can be misled, and that this woman's case ought to be reversed. In fact, it ought to be dismissed completely. Now, Stephen Cece is from Cornell University. Gail Goodman, who we heard about earlier, is an academic as well. She highlighted that kids can be resistant to suggestion. Stephen Cece has made it his life's work to show that kids are vulnerable to suggestion. You know, there's no right or wrong. He's a bright guy, and he does good research. And he's made it his business to show that kids aren't good at remembering stuff in the right circumstances. And, we learn from CC. We learn from some of these other studies. These are some of the questions that were asked in the Michaels case. 4.5-year-old was told lots of other kids have revealed abuse. Now, there's a reason why an investigator or a DYFS worker might say that. Why do you think that the DYFS worker might say that to the child?
To normalize to them, like if there was abuse.
Yeah, to normalize it. Sure, to make the kid feel that it's okay to tell about it, that you're not alone. You're not different. It's not just about you. What's the bad part of saying something like that? Well, it's leading, but what's the message to the child? How might the child
Give an answer, a positive answer that something occurred.
They may give a positive answer that something occurred. Why?
Because the way the question is asked, lots of other kids revealed abuse.
Right.
So if he's the interviewer?
Well, no, he hit it on the head. You're right in the right direction, but
to be part of the group.
To be part of the group, right? Don't you want to be part of the group? Okay. All of your friends are telling. There's this concern about tag-alongs or piling on or wanting to get involved because everybody else is. Now, there are ways to make kids feel at home and let them know that they didn't do anything wrong and it's okay, without talking specifically about the kids in the case. That was a problem. Once the child cooperated, the interview would end. Well, that's coercive. That's not an ideal way to question kids. When the child announced he hated the investigator told the child that he secretly liked the interviewer. In the first interview, 24 of 39 kids were handed anatomical dolls before disclosing any abuse. That's a no-no. We'll talk more about that later. Kids were offered toy plastic police badges in exchange for incriminating statements. Now, these kind of observations by the appellate courts that we put into bullet points seem stark and offensive when you look at them. I mean, that's not quite how it went down, though. They go, well, if we find out what happened, I'll give you one of these cool badges. People were trying to get the kids to feel comfortable. They're using strategies that parents used for time in memoriam to get them to eat their vegetables or go to bed on time, to negotiate, to use trades and bribes and all that. But you can't do that in a forensic interview. That's not good interview practice. So while these investigators and interviewers were not being malicious or being purposefully misleading, In fact, they were pretty much doing what they did with kids in informal contexts. It really doesn't matter. The upshot of it was children were being offered police badges in exchange for incriminating statements. That's what was happening, in fact, even though it didn't quite play out that way. This is a tag along. This is a transcript, by the way. You know, Gabriella, all your other friends that I talked to told me everything that happened. Mikey told me what happened. Daniel told me what happened. Now it's your turn. You don't want to be left out, do you, Gabriella? Do you? Boy, I'd hate to tell your friends that you didn't want to help them. Meh, not good, right? You know, lots of other kids was problematic enough. This detective is making this obviously a tag-along response. Be part of the crowd response. Hey, Danny, your mommy tells me that you guys are interested in busting this case wide open with us. Is that right? That's why I need your help. Especially you older kids, because you could talk better than the younger kids. And you will be helping to keep her in jail longer so that she don't hurt anybody. You'll hear about some things and read about some things that are part of the suggestibility equation. And this one has a couple of them right here. Okay? Number one, this is also kind of a tag along. Don't you want to do what the other kids are doing? You older kids can help the younger kids. You know, so that appeals not so much to what happened, but appeals to them wanting to be part of the group and be appreciated for their help. But they also are demonizing the defendant herself, the specific person. A kid who's not made a disclosure, a kid who's not said anything negative about Kelly Michaels, is told at the end of this preamble to the child, she's a bad lady, she's a child molester, she belongs in prison. Did she do something to you? That's called stereotype induction. When you vilify the target of the questioning, or the person that you are questioning the child about, they are more apt or more likely to make a negative statement about that person. If everybody agrees this person is bad, then they must be bad. And if you want me to say something bad, I'll give you something bad. Now, you know, cognitively it doesn't work as I just suggested, but that's kind of the idea here. You are priming the child to believe that Kelly Michaels is a bad person. And this is a dramatic example of stereotype induction. Okay? This tells the child she hurts kids. It's not too hard to throw Kelly under the bus, is it? It's not too hard to dump all over your nice preschool teacher now, when the policeman or the social worker tells you that she hurts kids. They made her into a witch. They demonized her. And then they said, did she do something to you? This demon lady? She is such a demon that you're going to help put her in a prison. We're going to lock her in a cage, this demon woman. Whatever their experience was with Kelly in the past, the system has grouped together to demonize Kelly Michaels. They didn't do it at the end when the case was over, or when they made their statements and said, okay, well, don't worry, we're going to try to get help, and we're going to try to make sure she doesn't hurt you or other kids, after the kid said that I was hurt. No, before they even got to the questions, before they even asked what happened, they said she's bad. She's a demon. She hurts kids, and she belongs in a cage. Now you tell us what happened. Bad. Stereotype induction. We'll look at more examples of that in a moment. Come on, do you want to help us out? No. Tell me what happened or I'll make you fall on your butt again. Okay. I hate you. No, you don't. Yes, I do hate you. Well, we can finish this real fast if you show me real fast what you showed me the last time. No. I'll let you play with my tape recorder. Come on, don't you want to help us out? Do you want to help us keep her in jail? Huh? Come on, man. You want to help us keep her in jail? Tell me what happened to the 3 other kids. Tell me what happened to them. Come on, I need your help again, buddy. No. You told us everything once before. Do you want to undress my dolly? Let's get done real quick so we go to King's to get popsicles. You know, to a preschooler, popsicles at King's is like offering me a beautiful steak at Smith & Walensky with stuffed mashed potatoes on the side and some sauteed spinach. I might not tell you things that didn't happen, but I'll tell you some of what you want to know if you offer me that. Not a good strategy. I mean, you have multiple things in here now, right? Bribery. I'm going to give you something to play with if you tell me what I want to know. Get this done real quick and I'll give you popsicles. You got double bribery. Before that, you have demonization. Same guy. 3 other kids happened to. Tell me what happened to them. I need your help, buddy. You got multiple coercive elements here. Multiple suggestive aspects in just 2 or 3 questions. Did Kelly ever do anything to you with a knife that hurt you? No. Did she ever do bad things or hurt you with a spoon? No. Why don't you show me how you think a little girl can be hurt by a fork? Whoa. Now we're asking kids to imagine, to pretend, to fantasize. Not a good thing. Now let me say something. You know, I was at the Attorney General's this afternoon with my colleagues from Essex County and Union and all over, and one of my dear friends is a prosecutor in Essex. We were chatting today, and you know, and I know Sarah Sensor McCardle, who tried this case. I didn't know her at the time. You know, she's a little older than me. I was in law school when this case was going on. You know, I've since come to know her. She's a Seton Hall fan. I see her at the games all the time. And, you know, she'd be the first one to say, we didn't know what we didn't know back then, you know. This was the early days. This was the time period when we began to say, you know what, we should believe these kids. Unfortunately, some people interpreted that as we need to believe the kids at any cost, no matter what. And that's not good practice. The passion that led to a re-examination of how we investigated and prosecuted intrafamilial abuse went too far. And I'll tell you, when I went to, and let me tell you something, I didn't know what the hell I was doing there. I went there as the legal, you know, I was a first-year law student. I thought I knew stuff, and I was with one of the psychologists from the Victims of Crime Board. And she's like, oh, why don't you bring the intern? They said, I'll go with you. Yeah, if you got any questions about the law. She was there solely to talk about reimbursement. Because the parents of these 20-something kids, or 30, whatever it was, you know, they wanted therapy for their kids, and the kids were having nightmares about peanut butter and all kind of issues. And you know, they were in therapy, and the Victims of Crime Board was going to reimburse them, and they needed to know how to fill out the papers and all of that administrative stuff. So to take the intern along, I went there. I was going to answer questions, and what a hostile group, man. I mean, they weren't hostile. I shouldn't say that, but they were stoked. They were on razor's edge, you know. And it was not 1 or 2. It was the parents of. There's 32 kids. There was 39 parents in there. Some of them were lawyers themselves, and you know, these were middle class and upper middle class folk, informed, plugged in, articulate. You know, I got knocked around the room in 5 seconds. So, what about discovery? I go, discovery? What's discovery? I didn't even know what discovery was. I hadn't litigated cases. I was a first-year law student. You know, I knew kind of the workings of the Victims of Crime Board. But my point in bringing up that my recollection is, one can imagine the group dynamic that occurred. among these people before they brought their kids to the prosecutor, before DYFS came to visit them, before these investigate. One can imagine the pressure. And it's no excuse. I mean, we have to deal with that every day. We need to be professional, and no one's going to bully me around. I'm a different man than I was back then. You know, I know a lot more, and I'm more confident and more experienced and more educated. But nevertheless, even today, I mean, if there's a tremendous interest in the outcome, if there's a mad rapist loose, you know, even the best of us wants to solve it, wants to make sure that the aggrieved citizens of this state get justice, you know, and one can only imagine the pressure that was on the Essex County prosecutor and the Division of Youth and Family Services and the clinicians involved from the caregivers. And I'm not saying they were very aggressive in the beginning, and I don't know much about it at all. I just know the tone of that room that day. And I know about similar cases now, and I can only imagine what it must have been like there. So we really didn't know what we didn't know. We were just learning. This was a new area of investigations. A lot of the strategies that were used were the way that we talked to kids informally. You know, come on, I'll give you this toy badge to play with. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said before, that's what we do with kids. We negotiate, we trade. Come on, if you eat your peas, I'll let you stay up 10 minutes later. But, you know, that doesn't translate well into the forensic context. So after Michaels, the cat was out of the bag, children's testimony was viewed with suspicion even more than it was because of Freud and the witch trials and all the other things that we feel about kids. I mean, especially in the courts of our nation. The Georgia Court of Appeals said in a child abuse case, it's reversible error to not allow a defense expert to testify about the police officer's techniques. Kelly Michaels never really changed the legal landscape around the country. There was the thought that it would, that every state would have these taint hearings. But they didn't. Concern about the recollections of kids took the world by storm. It took the academic world by storm. It took the law enforcement world by storm. And to some extent, it impacted the judiciary, the courts of our nation, tremendously. But not all of them marched in lockstep with the New Jersey Supreme Court and said you got to have a hearing about whether a kid's memory was tainted. It's an issue, but not every state said you have to have a hearing, and that's really for us lawyers to worry about. But that hearing requires that you bring in witnesses, that it could take a week, 3 or 4 days. There are other ways to deal with this rather than have a full-blown hearing. So now you have Kelly Michaels and you have the second wave of research. The research reflects these high-profile cases with multiple victims, and some courts give it great weight. This is an example of stereotype induction, and you guys are going to be experts on that by the end of this class because I showed you how Essex County did it in the Michaels case. Here's an experiment designed to show in a laboratory how stereotype induction works. Remember I said when you demonize somebody, when you say they're bad or say they're fat or not fat, clumsy or they have a particular personality, then the subject, in this case the child, will answer consistent with that stereotype. In this case, there was a guy named Sam Stone, and it was an experiment. It was in a preschool. They were 3 to 6-year-old kids. And once a week, in a class like this, pretend I'm the preschool teacher. I'm telling all of you, the preschoolers, all the 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and 6-year-olds, listen, it's not going to happen this week, kids. I just want to tell you this one thing before we leave, and mommy's come and pick you up and daddy's. In a couple of weeks, a man's going to come here, Sam Stone. He's really a clumsy man. He's always falling over and breaking things and dirtying things up. But you're not going to meet him today. His name is Sam Stone. That's a funny name, isn't it? Anyway, that's it a couple of weeks from now. See you later. Bye-bye. Go get your mommies. 1 week later, they do whatever they do in preschool. Oh, before you leave, I wanted to remind you that not this week, but in a couple of weeks, that guy Sam Stone's coming, the guy that breaks things, and he's clumsy. He's a bit of an oaf, a bit of a goofy guy, and he knocks things over and everything. But he's going to be fun. He'll come here, and that's going to be a fun day. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Week 3, week 4. So they go through this for 4 weeks. Sam Stone comes. The teacher introduces him to you, class. You students. He walks around the room. He smiles. He doesn't say or do anything. Comes back to the front of the room. Smiles at them. They say goodbye to Sam Stone. Goodbye, Sam Stone. He waves. He leaves the room. The next day, the kids are shown a soiled teddy bear that's got chocolate stains on it, all messed up. And they're shown a book that's torn. Now, the bullet point here says they're given fictitious evidence. My colleague, who is the brains behind Finding Words, pointed that out, and it's true. They're given fictitious evidence. They're given this soiled teddy bear, and they're given this ripped book. And then they're asked a bunch of leading questions. The kids were interviewed 2 minutes once a week for 4 weeks after the visit. After the first interview, 25%, or 1/4 of the kids, okay, one quarter of the kids. If there were 100 kids, 25 would surmise that Sam Stone was responsible for ripping the book or soiling the teddy bear. If there were 50 kids, it'd be about 12 of them. Let's say there are 50 preschoolers. 12 of them said, Sam Stone probably did it. Sam Stone is the guy. You want Sam Stone. He did it. Kids were asked leading questions like, I wonder if Sam Stone was wearing long pants or short pants when he ripped the book. I wonder if Sam Stone got the teddy bear dirty on purpose or by accident. We'll revisit these questions in a moment. The results, 10 weeks after the visit, there was a new interview. A new interview. 72% of the smallest kids, the 3 and 4-year-olds, claimed that Sam Stone ruined at least one of the items. 45%, disturbing bullet point, 45% claimed to have witnessed Sam Stone ruin one of the items. 11% of the 5 and 6-year-olds claimed to have witnessed Sam Stone ruin one of the items. So if there were 50 kids, okay, about 5 of them said, I saw him. He ripped the book, and he poured Bosco on the teddy bear. I seen it with my own eyes. Now, being emphatic, didn't come out that way, I'm sure. Well, actually, when you see the video, perhaps it did. Before I address this further, let's take a look at a clip concerning the Sam Stone study.
The interviewers could say, how else can we get this information out? Because the kids won't volunteer it.
The problem is that from a research standpoint, we are now discovering that if you put kids who were not abused through the same kind of highly leading, repetitive interview, some of those children will also disclose events that seem credible, but in fact are not born in actuality.
Now, others have suspected this, but Cece decided to test that theory. He set up an experiment known as the Sam Stone study. He told a classroom full of 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds that a man named Sam Stone would come to their class and that he was very clumsy. Then the man came in, stayed a few minutes, and left. That's it. He didn't do anything clumsy. Then, 4 times in the next few months, half the kids were asked leading questions about the man's visit.
Do you remember when Sam Stone came to the school and he broke that toy? Did he do it on purpose or was it an accident? Well, he didn't break a toy. So it's a highly suggestive, erroneously suggesting question.
After that, another interviewer simply asked,
I wasn't there that day, and I want to know everything that happened that day that Sam Stone came to visit. Can you tell me what happened?
this little boy said Sam Stone was reading a book during the visit to the classroom.
He was doing it so fast that he ripped one of the pages.
Really? Did he say
This girl said Sam Stone threw dolls and books in the air while he was in the class.
Well, when your teacher saw that he was throwing things in the air, what did she say?
You need to go.
You need to go?
Yeah, but keep on ripping our stuff.
Just asking leading questions inspired most of the kids to make stories up. In real-life cases, though, are the investigators as suggestive as your testers are?
What we do is a pale version of what happens in real cases.
Go ahead, question.
Yeah, Professor, you mentioned something about the false evidence.
Yeah.
You said that your partner, you were trying to mention that. Is that because maybe that affected the results?
Well,
They're not always presented false evidence to go with the suggestibility.
yes, and that is, you know, we want to look at, you know, as a prosecutor, when defense lawyers bring up this research in the courtroom, I have to be prepared to address it. So, you know, I'm not a researcher. I'm, you know, kind of an academic, I guess, because I teach here, but I'm not an academic who does this kind of work, and you have to be able to address it. And there are a number of areas that you can attack the Sam Stone study's outcome. It is a stark testament to the fact that if you vilify someone, you're going to get responses that are consistent with what you're saying. But whether they'll have a complete false memory or not, or whether they will be that primed to make the kind of compelling false statements that these kids do, remains to be seen. And I think you're onto something there. The reason why we point this out is that the shortcomings, I think, of the Sam Stone study are a number. Number one, we don't present kids with false evidence. So as an advocate, I would say, Judge, Sam Stone's study is bunk. You know, you're going to argue aggressively the other way. I don't think it's bunk. But you would say there are major problems with that study. We don't take little kids and say, aha, look, here's the colposcopic photos from Dr. Sands. You know, you were molested. There's a notch in your hymenal tissue at 4 o'clock. Your mother saw it. You know, we don't present them with fictitious evidence. Your daddy confessed. Even though sometimes you might want to tell the kids that kind of stuff, you don't. I think we all know not to do that. And most of the time, that stuff doesn't exist. So yes, in real life, we don't give kids fictitious evidence. There were things that were operational here, and you got your finger on it, other than simply saying Sam Stone is clumsy. What the interviewers want you to conclude is, not the interviewers, the researchers want you to conclude is that by simply portraying Sam Stone as an oaf and a clumsy guy over and over again, when you then ask leading questions, kids will make up stuff that's consistent with him being clumsy. Well, hold on a minute, we should say. Hold on a minute. That's not what happened here. You simply didn't ask highly leading, highly suggestive questions that Professor Ceci thinks we do all the time. You simply didn't do that. You simply didn't say Sam Stone's clumsy and then ask highly leading questions about Sam Stone being clumsy. You then showed them fake evidence. And you're right. You showed them a teddy bear that got soiled and a ripped book. Now that makes the fact of whether, forgetting about who did it, whether something happened, unassailable. A grown-up has said, something happened here. The teddy bear got soiled and a book got ripped. We need to find the culprit. That becomes a fact to the child, okay? That changes the dynamic, I would argue. So now they need to figure out who it was. Now, we're talking about preschoolers. The only guy in the room other than them and the teacher was this Sam Stone character. So that plays in. Now the oafishness is going to, the clumsiness is going to help form their responses, I would suggest. But this fictitious evidence also informs that response, I would argue, right? They're seeing this, but it must have happened. I didn't see it, but I could have saw it. Maybe I was looking at my shoelace and everybody else saw it. So it becomes a shorter throw. It becomes less of a lie, I guess, or less of an embellishment for the child if you got this evidence that it really happened. Well, I kind of saw it. I was there that day. I should have saw it. Maybe I missed something. You know, you ever have a kid in the car, if you have children or nieces or nephews or whatever, and you go to them, look at that, the moon is pink just over the mountain. Where? Don't you see it? And then it's gone. You drove past it. Where? I don't see it. Oh, I see it now. You didn't see it. It's not there anymore. You didn't see it. I remember with my little nieces around Christmas time, they would go, Santa Claus just went over the ridge over there. Where? They'd all run to the window. I see it. 2 or 3 of them would go, they see it. If you have a collection of kids, they'll all claim they saw it. because they want to be part of the group. They want to join in. You know, so that the adults saw it. It must be true. I did see something. It was a blur. Maybe it was a star. I don't know. That was Santa Claus. It's whatever. And I'm not saying this is bad research. It's good research, and we need to be mindful of it. I just passionately argue that calling Kelly Michaels bad and saying she's in jail is this kind of thing. Can't do it. It's bad. On the other hand, the Sam Stone study's got some problems. You know, it's not simply asking questions. It's showing them fictitious evidence. It's the equivalent of your uncle saying, Santa Claus is out there. I seen him. So that validates that he's out there, and they join in and say they saw it when in fact they didn't, or they saw something that they confused for that. But it doesn't end there. Because take a look. Remember I said we'll get back to these questions? So look at the bottom. They are leading questions. But look at what the questions are about. Now, they're told the guy's clumsy 4 weeks, multiple times. Then they're shown this fictitious evidence. That makes it more validated, more powerful. There's evidence. The grown-up showing it to them. It's real. It's not a fake. It's real. The grown-up shows it. And then the grown-ups say, hey, little kid, I wonder if Sam Stone was wearing long pants or short pants when he ripped the book. And if they say he was wearing short pants, what question are they answering? Are they saying Sam Stone is the book ripper, or are they simply telling us what? What pants he was wearing. And in their little minds, they may be saying to themselves, and this is where this fictitious evidence really confounds, I think, the integrity of this research, this fictitious evidence. They may be saying, well, it happened. These grown-ups investigated it. They found the teddy bear. They found the ripped book. They are on to Sam Stone. They just want my help about what he was wearing. And I remember that. He was wearing long pants, right? These grown-ups solved the crime already, but there's one little element they need help on, and I can help them with that. I know what kind of pants he was wearing. I remember that real well. None of that happens. I don't know how their little minds work, but I can envision that, you know. I mean, I can envision that they're answering the question about the clothing, and they have the utmost respect that it happened, in fact, because we gave them fake evidence. And our question tells them it happened. Our question implies that we figured out he did it already. We just want to know what he was wearing. So is the answer tantamount to claiming that Sam Stone ripped the book or soiled the teddy bear? I suggest not. I don't think that answers that question at all. I think it tells us that the kid was telling us what kind of pants he was wearing. Look at the next question. I wonder if Sam Stone got the teddy bear dirty on purpose or by accident. That's a little bit different. You know, to say it was one or the other, that kind of implies that they know something about the act. But again, it doesn't ask them whether he did it or not, or whether they saw him do it. It asks about his motives. Go ahead.
Is the case affected by, I guess, the multiple re-interview of the children? And my other question would be, in cases, how many times, I guess, the child is interviewed? Because I had a case where it involved a child who lived with the father in Florida and then came to New Jersey, claimed that her paternal grandfather molested her, and I dealt with the police down there, and they told me that they can only go by 3 interviews. The child can only submit to 3 interviews. And the case got affected because a year before that, the child had claimed that her father molested her in the same manner that supposedly her grandfather molested her this year. And she was, again, 3 or 4. We took her to Audrey Hepburn, and the case got closed because it wasn't enough evidence to prove. And I think 2 years later, she claimed that her stepfather molested her the same way.
Yeah. Well, you started out by asking me whether multiple interviews might be part of the Sam Stone study and might impact upon the credibility of the child's recollections or memory, or how good the case is, or how viable the case is. And the answer is yes. Sam Stone was more than stereotype induction. Its overriding lesson is stereotype induction, right? Induction is a fancy word for to induce. To induce is to make somebody do something. We use it in conspiracy and in bribery. If you want to induce a politician, you give them cigars and whiskey, and they'll vote for you, for your project. You know, induce means to try to get somebody to do something. If I wanted to induce you, it's related to seduce. A little bit different. What's that? Bribery? So what are we talking about? Stereotype induction. You by stereotyping a person, you induce them, you get them to do something through the stereotyping. So in this Sam Stone study, we're really concerned about stereotype induction. By dumping all over somebody, the kid might agree that they're bad. But there are other things that are at work here that we can't ignore, and that Stephen Ceci designed in this experiment. Stereotype induction, multiple interviews, which you just brought up, misleading and highly suggestive questions, and repeated misleading and highly suggestive questions. So, multiple interviews are problematic and can be suggestive. They don't have to be, but they can be. They're problematic. Misleading or leading or suggestive questions are problematic. Stereotype induction is problematic. And when you layer these things on top of one another, it's only worse, right? Asking a bad question once has the potential to corrupt the child's memory. Asking a bad question twice, 3 times, 4 times, quadruples the potential. So the more bad things you do, the more perilous the interview process, and the more likely the outcome has no credibility. You know, preschoolers are delicate. I mean, look, preschoolers, unfortunately, they are nearly impossible to prosecute without corroboration. If they're under 5, without corroboration, without medical evidence or an eyewitness, their narrative alone is not good enough for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk more about them in the future. There's another study that was part of the reaction or backlash after Kelly Michaels, the inoculation study. Now remember, we're trying to look for this thing called ecological validity, right? The kids threw Sam Stone under the bus. The kids accused him of things. But the other way to attack the Sam Stone study is to say, they have no relationship with Sam Stone. It's easy to say negative things about him. Contrast that with the typical intrafamilial abuse case, where they have a disincentive to tell on daddy or uncle or babysitter, right? In this case, they don't give a hoot about Sam Stone. He's unknown to them. So it is easy to say something negative about him. In the real world, remember about ecological validity. Does the experiment look like the real world? In most of our cases, the kid loves the guy who molested them, or has a significant loyalty to that person. In the laboratory research, like Sam Stone and the clown and all that, they don't know these people. There's no loyalty there. So that's what makes it somewhat different. That's why the ecological validity is lacking in some of these cases. There's no trauma. Sam Stone, there's nothing traumatic about that. Child abuse is traumatic. Now we have the inoculation study. That takes the scoliosis exam by Gail Goodman and the vaginal exam one step further, because not only are these kids in a more anxious environment, it's more formal than the clown study or the Sam Stone study, right? They're going to the doctor, that's formal. That's a little bit more anxious an environment, right? Well, we're going to ratchet up the anxiety even more because they're going to get a shot. And I'm 51, and if you take me to get a shot today, I don't get shots anymore, but if you took me, I'd make an excuse tonight to not go. I'd find my way around the shot if I could. So and for 4 and 5-year-olds, it's a bad situation. I wouldn't want to say it's traumatic in the clinical sense, but it's highly upsetting and anxious. So we're kind of getting closer to how's their little memories work, right? When you're in in a situation where there's high anxiety. And that's good because that brings us more ecological validity, right? So the memory processes that are in play, are in this experiment related to a traumatic event, getting a shot. So things are getting a little bit better with regard to ecological validity. Kids 4 to 5 receive a medical exam. After the exam, the researcher tells them, the researcher stays during the oral vaccine and an inoculation given by the doctor. The researcher takes the child to a waiting room. Now, I think there's something's missing here. I think half the kids got an oral vaccine and half the kids got a shot. I think. I'm not sure. I have to look that up. Anyway, about 11 months later, the kids are interviewed 4 times over a 2-week period, and they're told lies about the research assistant and pediatrician's duties. In the 4th interview, 40% of the kids falsely reported some of the duties of the players. That one's a little, because the lie or the false statements are about what the researcher did and the pediatrician did. If the pediatrician was the one who gave the shot and the researcher just watched, and then the interviewer said, and then the researcher gave you the shot, 4 out of 10 of them agreed that the researcher did the shot or got the oral, or said that he gave a shot when in fact he didn't give a shot. The mousetrap study is an interesting study as well. This is among the most disturbing pieces of video you're going to see in the area of suggestibility. And this is about the question you brought up about multiple suggestive interviews, where Sam Stone was directed at, although there were multiple interviews and fictitious evidence, but the overriding concern was stereotype induction. Here the overriding issue is multiple misleading questions asked over a course of weeks. And some children had false memories with lots of detail, with lots of perceptual detail. And without showing you, without going through all the issues in the how the study worked, I'll show you video about that one.
But why would kids make such things up? That's what convinces juries. You hear those stories and you say, okay, maybe it's not all true. Maybe the machine wasn't as big as a house. Maybe Kelly Michaels didn't smear them all with peanut butter. Teachers would have smelled that. But there must be some truth to it. How could children come up with so many inventive, kinky activities and describe them with so many details unless something really happened? It's a persuasive argument until you hear about Cece's next experiment. He had researchers ask 4- and 5-year-olds to pick a card out of a deck of 10. On each card was a question.
Okay, Derek. This one says, have you ever seen a baby alligator eating apples on an airplane?
No.
No? Have you ever had your finger caught in a mousetrap and had to go to the hospital? No? Class.
At first, almost all the kids say no.
Mm-mm.
But then, once a week for the next 10 weeks, they ask the question again. No coercion, no leading questions as in child abuse cases. They just gently repeat the question.
You went to the hospital because your finger got caught in a mousetrap. Did that happen? Yeah?
By week 4 or 6 or 10, most of the kids are saying, yes, it happened. They're not just saying yes, but giving such precise information about it that you'd think it must have happened.
Did it hurt?
Yeah.
Yeah? Who took you to the hospital?
My daddy, my mommy, my brother.
So where in your house is the mousetrap?
It's up down in the basement.
Down in the basement. What is it next to in the basement?
It's next to the firewood.
Anyway, what you see here is a child who's giving you a lot of perceptual detail. He's telling you where the mousetrap was. It was next to a wood pile in the basement. He had gone down there because he wanted to tell his dad, who was down there collecting firewood, that he was ready for lunch. He gets in an argument with his brother Colin, which he later goes on to describe. They were fighting over some action figure. Colin pushes him next to the wood pile. He doesn't see where his hand's going, and it gets caught in the mousetrap.
Were you surprised at the answers you got?
I think it's fair to say that my colleagues and I were absolutely shocked that by the 10th week, not only were they assenting to some of these things that didn't occur, but they were giving very coherent narratives, highly elaborated narratives that are, I think, quite persuadable.
By the time I met the same boy, it was weeks after the experiment, but he still could give lots of convincing details about things that never happened.
Was there a time when you got your finger caught in a mouse trap and had to go to the hospital? Which finger was it?
Remember, this is the result after a researcher simply asked the question once a week for 10 weeks. In real abuse cases, kids are questioned for years, often by parents, doctors, then by the investigator, perhaps a therapist, then by lawyers.
Who went with you to the hospital?
My mom and my dad and my brother Colin, but not my baby. He was in my mom's tummy.
This boy's testimony is even more remarkable because just a few days earlier, his father had discussed the experiment with him. He'd explained that it was just a test and the whole mousetrap event had never happened. The boy agreed it was just in his imagination. Still, listen to this.
Let me ask you, did your father tell you something about the mousetrap finger story?
No,
Is it true? Did it really happen?
A story.
It
really happened.
It's really happened? You really got your finger caught? It's really happened?
Yeah.
I assume the child isn't lying. They aren't intentionally making up stories.
Absolutely. I think they've come to believe it. It is part of their belief system.
Okay, so, you know, pretty sobering stuff, huh? You see a little boy have a complete recollection of something that never really happened. It's pretty sobering. But, you know, what I like to do when I have to deal with these questions, when I have to deal with this research, I like to point out that even in the mousetrap study, there are lots of kids who didn't have false recollections, who didn't make narratives about things that never happened. And one way that I like to express it is, despite the best efforts of some of the smartest academics in the world at some of the finest research institutions, despite the concerted efforts week after week after week with preschoolers, with children who have just become verbal, just begun to experience the world around them, despite the best and concerted efforts of the brightest academics in the world, they only got 22% of them to agree that something happened that never happened. Isn't it impressive that 78% of them didn't say something happened? So I like to turn it on its head, right? I like to say, what's fascinating about this is not that we misled 4-year-olds into believing they got their finger caught in a mousetrap. What's impressive is that the majority of them, the vast majority, stuck to their guns. People think that preschoolers will go whatever direction you want them to go in, that whatever you say they'll agree with, that they're easily influenced, that we can influence them simply by being grown-ups and forceful and asking bad questions. Well, guess what? In the mousetrap study, lots of kids never had a false recollection. Lots of kids did not bite. Lots of kids were resistant. To me, that rebuts the common misperception that even preschoolers are easily misled. The majority of them, the supermajority of them, were not. Now, having said that, it's still disturbing when this small minority, significant minority, provides a narrative that has lots of perceptual detail. That kid could be a witness in a mousetrap finger-catching case, and we'd convict, and that's not good. That leads to false positives. Although it happens in a small number of cases, or could happen, in a small number of cases. It is what we, under the rule of law in this country, do everything in our power to avoid, wrongly accusing someone. Let's take a look at the lessons from all this stuff. Well, the easy lesson is, let's not tell the kid the answer. When Sam Stone ripped the dolly, was he wearing long pants or short pants? Well, that's an erroneous, misleading question, right? Because it tells the kid that Sam Stone ripped the book. He didn't rip the book. That didn't happen. We're telling the kid an answer that's not true. And there are a variety of ways that you can give kids information. You don't want to ask leading questions. You don't want to fill in the blanks for the kid. You don't want to stereotype the perpetrator. You don't want to stereotype the perpetrator. Now, it can be as direct as, we're going to put Kelly Michaels in jail. You know, that's nearly the same as Sam Stone is clumsy. Kelly Michaels is bad. She belongs in a cage. I just want to find out if Daddy touched you any place on your body. Because that would be remember we talked about good touch or bad touch? That would be a bad touch. So that good touch, bad touch, in part, is rejected under modern investigative and interview theory, in part because of stereotype induction. Or, I just want to find out if Daddy touched you on parts of your body. People who touch kids on their body are bad people, or they shouldn't. You shouldn't, you want to make sure that you don't link up Daddy with being bad. And what I'm suggesting is the stereotyping can be more subtle than Kelly's bad, she belongs in jail. You have to be aware of those things. Watch out for these multiple victim cases. Remember, Kelly Michaels, I told you, started out with 3 to 5, I forget how many kids. Might have been 3 kids who made a spontaneous disclosure about her. But all the other kids didn't say anything about anything. We reached out to them. You want to be careful in those multi-victim cases. You always want to avoid assumptions about the crime. You want to explore alternative hypotheses. Alternative hypotheses. An alternative hypothesis means that you look at other reasons this state of affairs could occur. If a child has vaginal injury, well, maybe someone put his finger in her, or maybe she fell on a sharp toy, or maybe some other thing caused that injury. Maybe she's 11 and a half and began menstruating for the first time. Don't be quick to jump or rush to judgment, and always explore alternative hypotheses. For example, alternative hypotheses are relevant in those kinds of, they're relevant in all cases, but their importance is most pronounced in cases where there are ambiguous circumstances. And I'll give you a quick 3 or 4 right now. Hugs, roughhousing, wrestling, bath time, right? Medicine application. Now, anybody who in here is from child protection, you've had I was just wrestling with the kid, or I came in and I was bathing her, or the child says it happened during bath time, or it happened when we wrestled, or it happened when he roughhouses with me, or he puts medicine on me. We have a couple of examples that we use in Finding Words, where a guy takes some kids, he's a camp counselor, he takes kids camping, and he shows them how to shake their wieners. Well, everybody's getting upset. And you ought to be. The camp counselor took the little boys and showed them how to shake their wiener. Well, upon further questioning, because you need to, what are some other ways a camp counselor might stupidly show a kid how to shake a wiener? Where?
Hot dogs.
Well, that's an alternative hypothesis. Maybe he was shaking some ballpark wieners. That's good. That's good. That's the kind of thinking I like. But even if the wiener's a penis and not a dog, a hot dog, it happened in the shower area when they're in the bathroom. Maybe the camp counselor said, after you pee, you got to shake your penis a little bit. You got to shake your wiener. Maybe some 19-year-old, who's not worried about getting investigated in how this might be distorted, right? He's taking a pee. The other children are there, or a couple of them are there, a little group is there. They went in, whatever, they go in there, and he says, you're dripping pee-pee all over your leg. You got to shake your wiener when you're done. Well, when the kids disclose, they go, Big Mike showed us how to shake our wieners. And then he told Danny how to shake his wiener too. Where was he? What did he shake what part of his body did he shake his wiener with? His hand. How did he shake his wiener? Like this. Oh. And I don't need to make light of these things, but these ambiguous scenarios are all about context. If it happened around the campfire and he took off his shirt and was wearing his Speedos, then we might put a sexual connotation on it, right? But if it happened in the showers near the urinals, that's the alternative hypothesis. Does that make sense? By alternative, we mean other innocent explanations. And the way I like to present this is, I love my father dearly. He's been dead for some time now. He's a great man. Most of us, our parents can do no wrong, even though they may have done some things wrong in their day. But if my mother came home to me one day, and I had a sister, I don't have any siblings. If I had a sister and she said, your sister says your father put his finger in her vagina, he molested her sexually, I would say, as we see our clients do and our victims in our cases, and you might think about your own family, impossible! Daddy would never do that. That's not possible. I don't believe that. And we worry about what the mother doesn't believe her child, the siblings don't believe the child. When we talk about how kids experience abuse, how could they not believe their child? Well, that same emotion that I'm talking about drives this. And there are a lot of other things that work when caregivers and spouses and mothers don't believe that their mate did these things, or their brother or someone else. I like to say, if that happened to me, I go, no way, man. My dad did not do that. And here's what I would say. Now, I wouldn't immediately throw my sister under the bus and go, she's nuts, she dreamed it, she fantasized, whatever. I would say, there must be some other explanation. That's what the alternative hypothesis is. I would struggle. I would figure out all day and all night. I would think about. I'd want to gather every fact about what my sister said about my dad. I'd want to know where it happened, when it happened, what he was wearing, what she was wearing, what he said, what she said, where mom was, what time of day it was, what room in the house it was. I would find out every fact I could to show there must be some other explanation. It can't be. And at the end of the day, if the only explanation is the truth, then he did it. It's similar to what physicians call the differential diagnosis. When you go to the doctor, you give them a set of symptoms, right? They go, I'm coughing, my head hurts, I got a stuffy nose, I feel tingling in my fingers. Okay, so what do? What could it possibly... Those symptoms, believe it or not, are ambiguous. They're capable of multiple interpretations. So you go, well, it could be strep, it could be chickenpox, it could be measles, it could be mumps, it could be, some other thing. So you get more information. How long has this lasted? A week. Well, that rules out mumps. Because if it was mumps, your cheeks would be big. That's we rule it out. We rule it out. We look for alternative explanations till all we're left with is the diagnosis. That's called a differential diagnosis. You rule out everything that it could possibly be until you're left with what it is in most cases. You explore the alternative hypotheses. And that's what good cops and good social workers and good child protective service workers do. We also know that younger children are more suggestible than older children. If you look at all these studies, nearly every one of them involve preschoolers. And they're easy to pick on, anybody brings up all of this research, I go, well, my kid is not 10. It's not 3 or 4, she's 10. Or she's 11. The way to respond to this research is to take a look at your kid and your case and identify how it's different from that research. And you'll notice every one of those researchers, all mousetrap, inoculate, this, the Sam Stone, right? They were all 4, 5, maybe 6 preschoolers. They're the most vulnerable, and we know that. That's true. Kids 10 and older are no more suggestible than adults. Write that down. Kids 10 and older are no more suggestible than adults. They're suggestible, but so are you. And most of you believe everything I said this afternoon, and I made it all up. That's how suggestible you are. No. Adults are suggestible too. We know that. But you know, where's the danger? The danger is with kids that are in preschool. It is less of a danger between 6 and 10. And after 10, it's as no more dangerous than an adult or anybody else. An 11-year-old is no more suggestible than a 20-year-old. Right? Put the research in perspective. Again, how does the typical case we deal with differ from Kelly Michaels and the Sam Stone and the mousetrap and all that? Well, we're not interviewing kids who never disclosed. In 99% of our cases, the kid told somebody. Their disclosure was spontaneous. They told a guidance counselor, they told their teacher, they told their mother, they told their aunt, they were witnessed by someone else. These cases where you take a kid who's never been around the mousetrap or anything and start asking them mousetrap questions are different from what we do. I'm not saying sometimes we don't ask kids who never asserted that they were molested questions about being molested, but that's more in IAIU. Those are institutional cases. We don't go around, or the siblings once in a while that you ask questions, right? DIFAS workers. But the vast, nearly all of our cases involve a prior disclosure. That's different from the research. It's different from the research. We didn't put that idea in their head. That came out spontaneously. So it occurs after a report. I told you earlier that these kids have a disincentive to tell. The mousetrap, Sam Stone, the clown, the doctor, the pediatrician, the research assistant. The kids, there's no cost to saying they did something negative, right? If you say something negative about some research guy you don't know, or some pediatrician, or some clown, it's not saying something negative about your father, or your mother's brother, or your teacher, or your babysitter. These kids don't want to get people in trouble. So the class of kids that we interview, right? The class of kids that we interview have a disincentive to get them in trouble. That's the opposite. Well, not the opposite. That's fundamentally different from what happens with clowns and Sam Stones. In those cases, they could care less about Sam Stone or the clown. There's no loyalty, right? So that makes it different.
But can cases be tainted if, say, in custody battles, where one parent influences a child's disclosure?
Yes. Any kid can be influenced or have their recollection tainted. Again, you want to look at what that first disclosure looked like, but ask me in the future about custody battles, and I may address that on my own. But if I forget, I'll give you my feelings about custody battles. But yes, there can be erroneous statements of abuse that arise during custody battles. Most custody battles have no false disclosures of sexual abuse. Some do, and I'll explain what they look like, but that's a little bit different from what we're talking about now. And the notion that some evil caregiver inoculates the child with a false recollection or scripts a false accusation or a false molest to gain leverage in a custody battle is a myth. Does something like that happen sometimes? Yes. But my statement was the notion that some nefarious caregiver, some bad lady, typically a lady, takes her kid and scripts a false allegation is a myth. Are there circumstances where some bad, evil, angry caregiver influences their child's statements about molestation in a custody battle? Yes. And I'll tell you the difference some other day. Any questions? If you do, I expect to see you posting to that exam review. All's fair through Learning Module 4. And I'll see you next week right here.
One question. The articles that we have here that we didn't review does not mean that it may not be in.
The question was, in Learning Module 4, there are articles that I didn't talk about just now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that might be on the exam.
Okay.
The major thoughts there. I'm not going to look in the bottom of the article, but yes, you have to read them.
Okay.
You have to read them.
You have to report here because in Blackboard you said you didn't miss the test between 8:15 and 9 o'clock.
Yeah, can you turn the light on, please, Franklin? The question was, are we meeting here? Yes, that's a mistake. Thank you for pointing that out. We're going to meet our usual class time. We're not taking the exam between 8:15 and 9 o'clock. That's wrong. We're meeting here in class. You're taking the exam in class. Okay? And if I, perchance, am able to get College Hall 310, look at your emails, look at your Blackboard. I'll let you know. We will meet in another building, College Hall. It's the building kind of down there. You can look it up online. I don't think that's going to happen. If that happens, you'll take the exam on a computer there. If it doesn't happen, you're going to take it on paper. Ugh.